Today, we're going to be going over diffable data sources. Coming up. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be going over diffable data sources. Now, this is going to apply to both UI table views and UI collection views. You could use it on both. We're going to actually go over how to do it with the table view just because it's a little bit simpler. All the same steps are there for a collection view. It's just like, table views are simpler and they're probably more common. So let's go ahead and jump right into the project, show you that there's nothing too crazy or scary going on right off the bat. As we can see here, very basic users view controller. This is going to just be a UI table view controller. And as you can see in the main storyboard, we just have a navigation controller and then your basic table view controller right there. Also, we have an alert service. This is just going to create an alert so that we can create users. It's just going to bring up a UI alert controller. And then we have your basic user. Now, what I want you to notice about this user is that it's hashable. And when we're working with these diffable data sources, it's important that you're working with hashable objects. So luckily, our user object is a struct, which means that we can just add the keyword or conform to the protocol hashable, and all the magic happens by itself. You don't have to do anything else. But if you were gonna, if you were working with a class and you wanted to do something like this, then you have to implement the different things to make it hashable. And then you can still, even as a struct, you can still, put in your own hashable implementation if you want. But for the most part, all you have to do is just say, my object is hashable. That's it. All right, so now let's go ahead and jump over to our users view controller. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a section, because in table views, and same thing with collection views, in table views though, we usually have our data in our table view that's separated into sections. You remember, like, number of sections in the table view or number of sections in the collection view, things like that. So what we need to do is we need to create a section, and that also has to be hashable. So luckily, enums by default are hashable. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and create an enum called section, and that's going to be hashable by default. So let's go ahead and add that in right there. And as you can see, I'm just going to throw it into an extension. Throw it anywhere that you want. And as you can see, it's just your regular enum. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine section. And then we're just going to give it a case. In this case, just main, whatever. Once again, call it whatever you want. And then I'm going to set it to file private. I'm going to explain why I'm setting it to file private later, but it doesn't need to be file private, but better/best practices, right? So now that we have the two objects that we're going to be working with, which are the section and the user, and both of them are hashable, we can go ahead and create the data source. So let's go ahead and put it up here, somewhere up there, just make it look all nice and pretty, right? So this is going to be our data source. And as you can see, it's of type UITableViewDiffableDataSource. If you're going to be working with a collection view, UICollectionViewDiffableDataSource. And this is actually a generic object. So you have to specify what object is going to represent the section and what object is going to represent each of the individual rows, essentially. So as you can see, this is where we're actually working with our section that we created down here, and then the user object right here. And once again, this is only able to work because they're both hashable. Now, if I were to go back over here and remove hashable, and I were to go into, our controller, we should be getting an error. Let's go ahead and build it. We should be getting an error right here that's going to say, hey, you know what? User needs to be hashable. So that's why we need to make sure that it's hashable so that we can actually make a data source from it. So now if we go ahead and build it, everything's going to be all nice and sexy and pretty, right? So now that we have our actual data source, what we need to do is we need to actually configure the data source. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function down here that's going to be called configureDataSource. So let's go ahead and add that in right now. And as you can see, I'm just going to call it configureDataSource and no parameters. And we're going to grab our data source that we have up here, and we're going to set it equal to a new object. So let's go ahead and close out the sides, because these names get kind of long, and as you can see, they stretch across your entire screen, and we're going to fix that later, don't worry. But as you can see, we're creating a new UITableViewDiffableDataSource, and once again, since it's generic, we need to specify that it's a section and user working together, and we're going to actually tie it to our table view, which is automatically given to us by the UITableView controller. Once again, collection view, do the same thing, just pass in a collection view. Now this is the part where it's actually going to start looking kind of similar to us, because this is where we're actually doing kind of like the cell for row at index path. And you'll actually notice that you're going to get two of the same parameters that you would get in that method that you would normally call cell for row at index path. You're going to get the table view and the index path, but you're also going to get the actual object that's going to automatically be associated with it. So there's no more saying users and then passing in the index path.row or index path.item or checking the section or anything like that. It's automatically going to grab that user for you. And all we have to do is we just handle it the same way that we normally would in our cell for row at index path. So if we just go ahead and add that logic in there right now, as you can see, it was expecting us to return a UITableView cell for row at index path, and we're just gonna, create a cell by dequeuing it, with an identifier and an index path, which is being passed right here, right? And the table view is being passed from right there. We're grabbing our cell, the text label, setting the user the text to the user's name, and then just returning that cell. So pretty much what we're normally used to, we're just doing it somewhere different. And all we have to do now is just make sure that we're going to call this. So we're going to call our data source right here in our viewDidLoad. And this is essentially us setting up the table view with the cell for row at index path and then specifying how many sections and things like that. So this is handling all of that for us. So we don't really have to worry about anything so far. Next, what we need to do is we actually need to utilize this did tap add button, because as you can see right now, all it's going to do is we're going to press this add, we're going to be able to enter in a name, we're going to save it, and what it's doing is it's printing out the name right here, right? But what we actually want to do is we want to pass this name and create a user object, which is just, it just takes in a name, and then we want to update our users array up at the top, just like we normally would when we're adding or when we want to append a new object to a list. So let's go ahead and create a function that's going to handle that for us. And we have this function right here called add new user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make sure that I'm calling add new user from within this create user alert. And we do that like so. And since we are inside of a closure, we just want to make sure that we're going to have a weak reference to self so that we don't got those retain cycles, right, baby? Right. All right. So now, so far what we're doing is we tap on this button and it's going to essentially call the add new user once we get the name, and it's going to pass it into this add new user function. We're going to create a user, and then we're going to append that user to the user's array. Now, just in case you're lost, we're going to go through this example real quick just to make sure that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And what we'll do is we'll add a breakpoint down here at the bottom to make sure that it's being called as we expect it to. So let's go ahead and clear this out. Let's go ahead and add a user, call them Kilo. We're going to press save. Now we hit this breakpoint, and then once we do users.append, let's go ahead and print out. Let's make sure that you guys can see this. We're going to print out the users, and as we can see, we have one user in our array, and that's Kilo, right? One element in our array, that's Kilo. So everything's working as expected so far. But what we actually want to do is we want to make sure that it's going to show up inside of our table view, because nothing's happening yet, right? And in order for us to do that, we have to create what's called a snapshot. So let's go ahead and create a function that's going to handle this logic for us. So we're going to say Q8, and this is going to be our function that we're going to create. So we're going to do create snapshot from users. Now, a snapshot is essentially what is going to be used to figure out what the differences are in your collection view or in your table view. It's going to have a current snapshot, and then you're going to be creating a new snapshot. And what this is going to do for you is it's going to compare what's different and then apply those changes. And all this stuff is super optimized for you. You don't even have to think about it. But it's going to take this new snapshot, compare it to the old snapshot, and figure out what needs to be changed. And all this stuff is going to update in your UI automatically for you. So it's actually really nice. Now let's go ahead and create this snapshot. Now, as you can see, it's called a NSDiffableDataSource snapshot. And once again, this is also generic. So you have to specify what type of section it's going to be using and what type of object it's going to be using for the row. And we have the section, which is the actual section that we created down here once again, and then the user. And once again, both of those are hashable. Now what we have to do is, since this is a brand new snapshot and it's empty, as you can see, we're just creating an empty one doing this default initializer, we have to apply some changes. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be passing in our current users array, the one that has that's just been updated. So we're going to take our users, the one that's just had the new object appended to it, pass it into this new function, and then we're going to apply the changes to this new snapshot. And then we're actually going to call snapshot.apply or dataSource.apply these snapshot changes so that it can update in real time. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right. So as you can see, we have two methods that we need to call. So on our snapshot, we have append sections. So we need to specify which sections are being updated in this snapshot, and we need to specify what users we're going to be, or what the new users are looking like in this snapshot, because once again, this is an empty snapshot. So we have to essentially build it up to what it's supposed to look like, and then that's when we're going to call dataSource.apply snapshot right here. And we want things to be sexy, so we're going to say true because it's animated, right? So we're building a new snapshot. We're making sure that we're specifying what type of section it's going to use and what users it's going to be using. And then we're going to apply those changes to the snapshot itself. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're calling the new function create snapshot. And then this should be everything that we need in order to set up our table view. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure that it's working as expected. All right, so we're up and running, and then we have a new user, and that's Kyle, and we add it, and look at that, animated, inserted in, beautiful as ever, and then if we do add a new one, we just say Paul. And bam, animated. So no more of that poo-poo, table view reload data. No, this is actually giving you the actual animations that you want. It's going to insert it nicely. It's going to do everything for you. There's no more running out of, index out of range and all that other stuff. You don't have to even think about it. Bam, just like that. It's already working. So if we go ahead and add one more, look at that. Added right in there. Now, let's say that we wanted to do something like select it and, go to a different screen or something like that. Then, you still have to use the same delegates that are provided to you by UIKit. So we're going to just go ahead and do the, did select row at index path. But instead of working with index paths, because they're kind of unsafe and they require you to think a little bit more than you should have to, what we're going to do is we're going to access the user at that index path automatically, and then we're going to do whatever we need to do with that user. So let's go ahead and add that functionality in right now. So as you can see, I'm doing the did select row at index path, and all we're going to do is we're going to grab the user by using the data source, and it has a function or a method on it called item identifier for index path. So based off of your data source, it's gonna since it's using the two different hashable objects, it's going to be able to look up your object by the index path for you. You don't have to do any logic. You don't have to check the section. You don't have to check the row, the item, none of that. It's going to do all that for you. It's going to grab the exact right object, our user, and then we're just going to print out that user. So let's go ahead and run through this one more time. And I think I accidentally grazed my keyboard, so let's fix that real quick. And then let's go ahead and add some more users in there. So we got Kyle, then we got, Mark, we got Scott, and then when we go ahead and tap on it, as you can see, now we're printing out the user itself, and that user's name is Mark. Or, we tap on it and then bam, we got Scott, and it's printing out Scott. So that's pretty much it on how you use that diffable data source. It's really easy. It shrinks it a little bit, but it really takes the complexity out of creating a table view or a collection view, and it makes it so that you don't have to think as much. Once you start going through this process of just creating this data source up here, everything's going to get a whole lot easier. Now, as you can see, these names are super long and they're freaking ugly. They are so freaking ugly. Like this one down here, freaking ugly. We don't want to be working with those. So what we're going to do at the top is we're just going to go ahead and add in some type aliases just to make our code a little bit sexier. So let's go ahead and add in a couple of type aliases. And what this is going to do is it's going to shrink the amount of code that we have to write when we're actually using the data source or using the actual snapshot. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a type alias for the data source. And as you can see, it's just the same UITableViewDataSource. Now, since we're outside of the actual UI or the user's view controller class, we have to actually specify that we want the user's view controller dot section, and then we're still going to be using a user. Now that's why I actually made this file private, so that it's still exposed to the rest of the file, and it's still private, and we can still access it from the type alias, but everywhere else in our code, it's not going to be accessible like that. So if we wanted to create another user data source somewhere else, we can still do that, and it doesn't have to be this exact type of user data source. So that's why we're using file private on this enum down here. Once again, do whatever you want with it. So now I'm just going to go back, make our code a little bit sexier by replacing all the data sources. So instead of this long one right here, we'll just be like, bam, look at that. I'm super sexy. Like, yeah, who doesn't want super sexiness, right? We're going to do this one right here. Bam, super sexy. Can't stop me. So there's nothing they can do to stop you guys. Like, now you could just have the sexiest code in the world. Look at this, user snapshot. What's that down here? Kind of ugly? I don't think so. We want it to be sexy. I said super sexy. And now you got the snapshot. So now we can go up here. We can run the code. Everything looks super sexy, kind of, our user table or our user's view controller kind of has like a butter face, like don't look at her face, right? But everything else looks pretty, and then everything still works. So we can still do Kyle, Mark, and Mayank, right? So all that stuff is still working. So I hope that you guys learned something new. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you learned something new, thumbs up and subscribe. It helps your boy out. I really appreciate it. And if you have any other topics that you want me to cover, just leave them down in the comments. Can't guarantee that I'll get to them, but I'm going to definitely try. All right, that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for your time. Go out there, keep coding passionately.